The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Sarah Mitchell pushed through the heavy metal door of the military training facility locker room. Her gym bag hung loosely over her shoulder, and sweat still clung to her neck from the intense workout she had just finished. At 42 years old, she maintained the same lean, muscular build that had carried her through 15 years as a Navy SEAL, though most people who passed her on the street would never guess her background. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was comfortable, familiar even, after years of operating in the shadows. The locker room was older than most of the recruits training at the facility. Cracked tiles lined the floor, and the smell of industrial cleaner mixed with decades of sweat created an atmosphere that reminded Sarah of her early days in the service. She had been hired 3 months ago as a civilian combat instructor, brought in to teach hand-to-hand combat techniques to new military recruits. The pay was decent, the work kept her sharp, and it beat sitting behind a desk trying to adjust to civilian life after her retirement. Sarah made her way to her assigned locker in the corner, the one with the slightly bent door that never quite closed right. She spun the combination lock with practiced ease, the numbers ingrained in her muscle memory. As the lock clicked open, she heard the locker room door slam behind her with more force than necessary. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, sharp and aggressive. She did not turn around immediately. Years of training had taught her to assess situations calmly, without revealing her awareness. 3 sets of footsteps entered the room, heavy boots striking the tile floor in an uneven rhythm. Sarah could tell from the cadence that they were not simply passing through. The steps slowed, became deliberate. She continued unpacking her bag, pulling out her water bottle and towel with unhurried movements. Through her peripheral vision, she caught sight of 3 soldiers in standard training fatigues. They were young, probably early 20s, with the kind of swagger that came from limited experience and unlimited confidence. The tallest of the 3, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut so fresh his scalp still showed razor burn, stepped forward first. His name tape read Davidson. He crossed his arms over his chest and planted himself about 10 feet from Sarah's position. His 2 companions flanked him on either side, forming a semicircle that blocked the most direct path to the exit. The one on the left had a thin scar running through his eyebrow, and the one on the right kept cracking his knuckles in a repetitive, nervous gesture. "You lost, lady." Davidson's voice carried the kind of false authority that young soldiers sometimes adopted when they wanted to seem more important than they were. "This is the instructor locker room. Civilians use the facilities on the other side of the building." Sarah closed her locker door slowly and turned to face them. She kept her expression neutral, her body language relaxed. She had dealt with this type of confrontation more times than she could count, though usually in very different contexts. "I am an instructor," she said simply. Her voice was calm, almost friendly. "Combat training. I've been working here for 3 months." The soldier with the scarred eyebrow, whose name tape identified him as Chun, let out a short, derisive laugh. "Combat training? You." He looked at his companions as if sharing a private joke. "What do you teach, yoga? Self-defense for suburban moms." Sarah did not react to the mockery. She had learned long ago that reactions were what people like this fed on. Instead, she picked up her towel and draped it over her shoulder. Basic hand-to-hand combat, defensive tactics, situational awareness. Standard curriculum. She moved to step past them, but Davidson shifted his weight, subtly blocking her path without making it obvious. "See, here's the thing," Davidson said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "We've been hearing things. Word around the base is that they brought in some woman to teach combat skills to real soldiers. Some of the guys think it's a joke. I think it's worse than a joke. I think it's disrespectful." The 3rd soldier, the one who had been cracking his knuckles, finally spoke up. His name tape read Murphy. "We've been training for years," Murphy said. "We've earned our place here. Then, they bring in someone like you, probably checked some diversity box, and suddenly, you're supposed to teach us how to fight? It doesn't make sense." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "I was hired based on my qualifications and experience. If you have concerns about the training program, you should take them up with your commanding officer." She tried again to move past them, and again Davidson blocked her way, this time more obviously. "We're not talking to our CO," Chin said, stepping closer. "We're talking to you." Right here, right now. Because someone needs to tell you that you don't belong here. This isn't a place for women playing soldier. This is real military training, and it requires real instructors who actually know what they're doing. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. I suggest you step aside and let me pass. Her voice had dropped half an octave, taking on a harder edge. It was the voice she had used countless times when dealing with hostile situations, the voice that meant the window for peaceful resolution was closing. Davidson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Or what? You're going to report us? File a complaint? That's exactly what we're talking about. You don't belong in this environment because you can't handle it. Real soldiers don't run to authority every time someone hurts their feelings. My feelings are fine, Sarah replied. But you're now officially interfering with a civilian contractor performing her duties. That's a violation of base regulations. So I'll say it one more time. Step aside. Instead of stepping aside, Davidson moved closer. He was now less than 3 feet from Sarah, using his height advantage to try to intimidate her. Make us, he said quietly. If you're such a qualified combat instructor, prove it. Show us what you've got. The situation had escalated exactly as Sarah had known it would. These young soldiers had come into the locker room with a purpose, and they were not going to leave until they had proven whatever point they thought they needed to prove. She could see it in their body language, in the way they had positioned themselves, in the increasing tension in their shoulders and fists. Sarah set her gym bag down carefully on the bench beside her. She kept her movements slow and deliberate, non-threatening. This is your last chance to walk away, she said. I don't want trouble, and you don't want the consequences of what you're about to do. Consequences? Murphy laughed. What consequences? There are 3 of us, and 1 of you. Nobody else is in here. It's your word against ours. And let me tell you, lady, our word carries a lot more weight than yours. Davidson reached out suddenly, his hand moving towards Sarah's shoulder, intending to shove her back against the lockers. It was a dominance move, meant to physically intimidate and establish control. But his hand never made contact. In a movement so fast the 3 soldiers barely registered it, Sarah's left hand shot up and intercepted Davidson's wrist. Her fingers locked around it in a grip that made Davidson's eyes widen in surprise. Don't touch me, Sarah said, her voice now completely flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of someone who had been in genuine combat, who had faced real danger, who understood exactly how violence worked. Davidson tried to pull his wrist free, but Sarah's grip did not budge. Surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by anger. Let go of me, he demanded, his voice rising. Walk away, Sarah repeated. All 3 of you. Walk away right now, and we can forget this happened. Instead of walking away, Chun and Murphy moved in from the sides. Chun grabbed for Sarah's right arm, while Murphy went for her left, trying to trap her between them. It was a coordinated move, practiced, suggesting they had worked together before. But they were moving against someone who had spent 15 years training for exactly these kinds of situations against opponents far more dangerous than 3 angry recruits. Sarah released Davidson's wrist and dropped her weight, bending her knees and lowering her center of gravity. Chin's hand passed through empty air where her shoulder had been a moment before. She pivoted on her right foot, using Chin's forward momentum against him. Her left hand pressed against his back as he stumbled past, sending him crashing into the lockers with a loud metallic bang. Murphy was faster, adjusting his approach mid-movement. He managed to grab Sarah's left arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. But Sarah did not try to pull away. Instead, she stepped into him, closing the distance, getting inside his reach. Her right elbow came up in a short, sharp strike that caught Murphy in the solar plexus. The air rushed out of his lungs in a painful wheeze, and his grip on her arm went slack. Davidson had recovered from his initial surprise and was now coming at her from behind. Sarah heard his footsteps, sensed the displacement of air as his arm swung toward her neck. He was going for a choke hold, trying to wrap his arm around her throat from behind. It was a move that might work on an untrained opponent, but Sarah had been choked out by experts more times than she could count during her training. She knew every variation, every counter, every mistake that people made. She dropped her chin, tucking it against her chest to protect her airway. At the same time, she reached up with both hands and grabbed Davidson's incoming arm. Using his own momentum, she pulled down hard while simultaneously dropping to one knee. Davidson's body pitched forward over her shoulder, his balance completely compromised. Sarah rose slightly and twisted, adding rotational force. Davidson's feet left the ground, and he crashed onto his back on the tile floor with an impact that knocked the wind out of him. Chen had recovered from his collision with the lockers and was charging back at her, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He threw a wild punch aimed at Sarah's head, telegraphing his movement so obviously that she had multiple options for countering it. She chose the simplest one, slipping her head to the left so that his fist passed harmlessly by her ear. Then, she stepped in close, her right hand shooting out in a palm strike that caught Chun on the chin, snapping his head back. Her left hand grabbed the back of his neck, controlling his posture, and she drove her knee into his midsection. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Chin's legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Murphy had caught his breath and was back in the fight, but more cautiously this time. He could see that his initial assessment of this woman had been drastically wrong. He came at her with more respect, his hands up in a defensive posture, trying to use his training. He threw a combination, jab, cross, hook, all with decent form. Sarah blocked the first 2 and ducked under the third, her movements economical and efficient. She did not waste energy with unnecessary flourishes. She countered with a low kick to Murphy's lead leg, striking just above the knee with enough force to buckle his stance. As he dipped forward, she grabbed his shirt with her left hand and pulled him off balance, then swept his legs out from under him with her right foot. Murphy hit the ground hard, the back of his head bouncing off the tile with a sickening thud. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. All 3 soldiers were now on the ground, groaning, clutching various parts of their bodies. Sarah stood in the center of the locker room, her breathing barely elevated, her stance relaxed but ready. She had not broken a sweat. The gym bag still sat on the bench where she had placed it, undisturbed. Davidson was the first to try to get up, rolling onto his side and pushing himself to his hands and knees. His face was red, whether from exertion or embarrassment Sarah could not tell. Probably both. He looked up at her with a mixture of shock, pain, and something else. Fear, perhaps, or maybe the first stirrings of respect. "Stay down," Sarah said firmly. "All of you. This is over." But it was not over. Not yet. Davidson's pride had taken more damage than his body, and pride made people do stupid things. Sarah saw it in his eyes the moment before he moved, that flash of desperate determination. He surged to his feet, faster than she expected for someone who had just been thrown to the ground. His hand went to his belt, and Sarah's body tensed, her mind racing through possibilities. Was he armed? Knife? Baton? Military personnel in training facilities typically did not carry weapons in locker rooms, but assumptions got people killed. Davidson's hand came away from his belt with a standard issue training knife, the kind with a rubber blade used for practice drills. It could not cut, but it could still hurt if used with enough force. He held it in a reverse grip, the blade pointing down from the bottom of his fist. It was a grip that suggested some knife training, probably from basic combat courses. "You think you're so tough?" Davidson's voice was shaking now, adrenaline and anger warring with the pain he was feeling. "Let's see how tough you are when the stakes are real." Chun and Murphy were climbing to their feet as well, more slowly, more carefully. They kept their distance, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The dynamic had shifted. What had started as bullying and intimidation had turned into something more dangerous. Sarah's expression hardened. This had gone far beyond acceptable behavior. This was now assault with a weapon, even if it was a training weapon. "Put the knife down," Sarah said, her voice cold and authoritative. "Right now? This has already gone too far. Don't make it worse." "Worse?" Davidson laughed, but it sounded more like a bark. "Worse for who? For you? You just assaulted 3 soldiers. You're finished here. Your career is over. Unless..." He gestured with the knife, pointing it at her. "Unless we all agree this was just a training exercise gone wrong. An accident. You apologize, admit you don't belong here. And we forget this happened." Sarah's eyes locked onto the knife, tracking its movement. Her mind was already running through scenarios, calculating angles, and timing. "That's not going to happen," she said. "You came in here looking for trouble. You found it. Now you need to deal with the consequences." Davidson feinted forward with the knife, testing her reaction. Sarah did not flinch, did not step back. She maintained her position, her body coiled like a spring, ready to move in any direction. Davidson feinted again, this time committing more to the movement. The rubber blade slashed through the air in a downward arc. Sarah pivoted to her left, the knife passing inches from her right shoulder. Before Davidson could reset his stance, Sarah moved in. Her left hand shot out and grabbed his knife hand at the wrist, her grip like iron. Her right hand came up and struck the inside of his elbow, compromising the structure of his arm. Then, she twisted, applying pressure to his wrist in a direction it was not meant to bend. Davidson's fingers spasmed open, and the training knife clattered to the tile floor. Sarah did not let go of his wrist. Instead, she used it as a lever, spinning Davidson around and pulling his arm up behind his back in a textbook arm lock. She applied just enough pressure to control him without causing injury, though from the way he gasped, it was clearly uncomfortable. "I said it's over," she hissed into his ear. "Do you understand me now?" Davidson tried to struggle, but every movement he made only increased the pressure on his arm and shoulder. "Yes," he finally gasped out. "Yes, okay, I understand." Sarah released him and stepped back, putting distance between herself and all three soldiers. She was breathing a little harder now, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline that always came with physical confrontation. Chun and Murphy had backed up to the far wall, their hands raised slightly in a gesture of surrender. They had seen enough. The fight was gone from their eyes. "All three of you need to leave," Sarah said. "Now, go to your barracks and think very carefully about what happened here. Because tomorrow, you're going to have to decide whether you want to file a false report about this incident or whether you want to tell the truth." Davidson was cradling his arm, rotating his shoulder to make sure nothing was damaged. His face was still flushed, but the anger had drained out of him, replaced by something that looked like shock. The reality of what had just occurred was sinking in. He had just been thoroughly defeated by the woman he had come here to intimidate and humiliate. "You're going to pay for this," Davidson said, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the last gasp of wounded pride, not a genuine threat. Sarah picked up the training knife from the floor and held it up. "You pulled a weapon on a civilian contractor in a military facility, with two witnesses who are going to have to decide whether to lie for you or tell the truth about what happened here. So before you start making threats about what I'm going to pay for, you might want to think about your own situation." The three soldiers exchanged glances. Sarah could see the communication happening between them, the silent conversation about how they were going to handle this. Finally, Chin spoke up. "This is insane. We came in here to talk to her, and she attacked us. That's what happened. That's what we're going to say." Sarah had expected this. Young soldiers, especially ones who had just been beaten in a fight they started, often defaulted to the easiest narrative, the one that made them look like victims rather than aggressors. "You think that's going to work?" she asked. "You think your story is going to hold up when they start asking questions? When they review the security footage?" That stopped them. Murphy's eyes widened slightly. "What security footage?" Sarah gestured toward the corner of the locker room where a small camera was mounted near the ceiling. It was partially obscured by a ventilation pipe, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. This facility was upgraded with security systems 6 months ago. Every locker room, every hallway, every training area. They installed cameras everywhere after that incident with the equipment theft last year. The three soldiers turned to look at the camera, and Sarah could see the panic beginning to set in. Davidson's face went pale. Chin closed his eyes and muttered something under his breath. Murphy actually took a step back, as if physical distance from the camera could somehow change what it had recorded. "So here's what's really going to happen," Sarah continued, her voice firm but not unkind. "That footage shows you three coming in here, blocking my exit, escalating the situation, and eventually one of you pulling a weapon. It shows me defending myself using appropriate force. When this gets reviewed, and it will get reviewed, the only question is going to be what happens to you three." Davidson's shoulders slumped. The fight had completely left him now, replaced by the crushing realization of how badly they had miscalculated. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to understand something, Sarah said. I don't know what you've heard about me, or what assumptions you made about who I am or why I'm here. But I earned my place in this facility the same way you're trying to earn yours. Through hard work, training, and dedication. The difference is, I've been doing it a lot longer than you have. She walked over to the bench and picked up her gym bag, slinging it over her shoulder. I'm going to file a report about this incident. I have to. But what I say in that report can vary. I can describe this as a premeditated assault by 3 soldiers on a civilian contractor, which is what it was. Or I can describe it as a regrettable misunderstanding that escalated due to poor judgment on both sides, followed by a training demonstration that got out of hand. Chun looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. You would do that? After what we did? I'm not doing it for you, Sarah said bluntly. I'm doing it because I remember what it was like to be young and stupid and full of myself. I remember making mistakes, bad ones, and being given a second chance by someone who didn't have to give me one. So I'm going to extend that same courtesy to you 3. Once. But only once. Murphy stepped forward, his voice hesitant. Why? We came in here till we were wrong. We were completely wrong. Why would you help us? Sarah looked at each of them in turn, her gaze steady and unwavering. Because despite the incredibly poor judgment you demonstrated today, you're still soldiers. You're still serving your country. And I've spent most of my adult life believing that service means something. It means being better than your worst impulses. It means learning from your mistakes instead of being destroyed by them. Davidson rubbed his shoulder, wincing. What do we have to do? First, you apologize. Not to me, necessarily, though that would be appropriate. But to yourselves, for being the kind of soldiers who would pull a stunt like this. Second, you show up to my next combat training class. All 3 of you. And you participate with respect and professionalism. Third, you never, ever do anything like this again. Not to me, not to any other instructor, not to anyone. Because if you do, there won't be a second chance. Understood. All 3 nodded. Understood, they said, almost in unison. Sarah headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing. I know you probably think I got lucky today, or that you were holding back, or some other story you're going to tell yourselves to make this easier to process. Don't. What happened here today happened because I have 15 years of experience that you don't have. That experience matters. It's not about gender, and it's not about politics. It's about skills learned through hard work and time. If you can accept that, really accept it, then you might actually learn something valuable during your time here. With that, Sarah walked out of the locker room, leaving the 3 soldiers standing in stunned silence. Her heart was pounding, not from fear but from the adrenaline come down that always followed conflict. Her hands were steady, though, and her mind was already moving through the necessary next steps. She had to file a report, had to document what had happened, had to make sure this was handled properly through official channels despite the break she was giving the 3 soldiers. She made her way through the facility corridors, nodding at a few other instructors she passed. Nobody gave her a second glance. She looked exactly as she always did after a workout, maybe a little more focused, a little more intense, but nothing that would draw attention. She had learned long ago how to compartmentalize, how to process intense experiences while maintaining an external appearance of calm. The administrative offices were on the 2nd floor of the main building. Sarah climbed the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell. She pushed open the door marked Facility Commander and found herself in a small waiting area. Behind a desk sat a young corporal who looked up from his computer screen as she entered. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked politely. I need to speak with Commander Harrison, Sarah said. It's urgent. There was an incident in the instructor locker room that needs to be reported. The corporal's expression shifted from polite to concerned. What kind of incident? The kind that needs to be discussed with the commander directly. Sarah replied firmly, but not unkindly. Is he available? The corporal picked up his phone and spoke quietly into it for a moment, then hung up and nodded. Commander Harrison can see you now. Go right in. Sarah opened the inner door and stepped into a spacious office. Commander James Harrison sat behind a large wooden desk covered with neat stacks of papers and files. He was in his mid-50s, with gray hair cut in a regulation style and sharp blue eyes that had seen decades of military service. He stood as Sarah entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone accustomed to command. "My aide said there was an incident." "What happened?" Sarah sat down and laid out the events clearly and concisely, leaving out no important details. She described how the three soldiers had entered the locker room, how they had blocked her exit, how the confrontation had escalated, and how she had been forced to defend herself. She mentioned Davidson pulling the training knife, and she mentioned the security camera that had captured everything. What she did not mention was her offer to soften the report in exchange for changed behavior. Commander Harrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story progressed. When Sarah finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Three soldiers assaulted a civilian contractor in a military facility. One of them pulled a weapon. "This is serious, Ms. Mitchell. Very serious." "I'm aware," Sarah said. "That's why I came straight here." Harrison rubbed his temples. "I'll need their names. We'll have to pull the security footage, conduct a formal investigation. Depending on what we find, those three could be facing court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly even criminal charges if you decide to press them." Sarah had anticipated this moment, had thought through her response during the walk from the locker room to the office. "I understand the severity, Commander, and I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation. But I'd like to request something, if I may." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead. These soldiers made a terrible mistake today, but they're young, and I believe this was born out of ignorance and misplaced pride rather than genuine malice. I've dealt with far worse in my career. If the security footage confirms my account of events, which I'm confident it will, I'd like to request that disciplinary action be firm but focused on correction rather than destruction." Harrison studied her carefully. "You want leniency for three soldiers who attacked you. I want appropriate consequences that include education and rehabilitation," Sarah clarified. "What they did was wrong, absolutely. But ending their military careers over one colossally stupid decision seems excessive if there's another way to handle it. A way that ensures they learn from this and become better soldiers." The commander was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Finally, he spoke. "I appreciate your perspective, Ms. Mitchell, and I respect your restraint, both in the locker room and now. But I have to consider the broader implications. If word gets out that soldiers can assault a civilian contractor and receive light punishment, it sets a dangerous precedent." "I understand that concern," Sarah said. "But word isn't going to get out if we handle this correctly. A quiet disciplinary action, mandatory counseling and retraining, and close monitoring of their behavior going forward. They made a mistake, they face consequences, and the institution maintains its integrity without turning this into a spectacle that helps no one." Harrison leaned forward. "You said you've dealt with far worse in your career. I've read your file, Ms. Mitchell. 15 years as a Navy SEAL. Multiple deployments to hostile territories. Commendations for valor under fire. You could have killed those three boys in that locker room if you'd wanted to." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I could have, but that's not who I am. I use force when necessary and proportional. Today required me to defend myself and establish control of a dangerous situation. It did not require me to cause permanent harm to three misguided young men who didn't know what they were getting into." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Harrison's mouth. "You know, when we hired you, there was some resistance. Some of the old guard didn't think a woman, even one with your credentials, should be teaching combat skills to male soldiers. I overruled them because your record spoke for itself. I'm glad I did." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said simply. Harrison picked up his phone. "Get me Lieutenant Bradley from security. I need to review some camera footage immediately." He hung up and looked back at Sarah. "I'm going to watch that footage myself. If it shows what you've described, then we'll proceed with a formal investigation. But I'll take your recommendations under advisement regarding disciplinary measures. These soldiers will face consequences, make no mistake. But perhaps those consequences can be constructive rather than purely punitive." "That's all I'm asking," Sarah said. "One more thing," Harrison added, his tone becoming more serious. "I want you to know that this incident reflects poorly on this facility's culture. The fact that three soldiers felt emboldened enough to do what they did suggests there are attitudes and behaviors here that need to be addressed more broadly. That's on my leadership, and I intend to correct it. Sarah stood. With respect, Commander, every military facility I've ever been part of has had cultural issues that need ongoing attention. That's not unique to this place. What matters is how leadership responds when those issues surface. Based on this conversation, I'd say you're responding appropriately. After leaving Harrison's office, Sarah made her way to the parking lot. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the asphalt. She unlocked her truck, tossed her gym bag in the back seat, and sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine. The adrenaline had fully worn off now, leaving her feeling tired but clear-headed. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her old SEAL team buddy, Marcus Rodriguez, who now ran a private security consulting firm. Heard through the grapevine, you had some excitement today? You good? Sarah smiled slightly. News traveled fast in military circles, even among veterans. She typed back, all good. Just reminded some young soldiers that assumptions are dangerous. How's civilian life treating you? Marcus's response came quickly. Boring compared to the old days, but profitable. Speaking of which, I might have a job opportunity for you if you're interested. Private contract work, good pay, uses your skill set. Call me when you have time. Sarah pocketed her phone without responding immediately. She would call Marcus later, after she had time to decompress and think through today's events more fully. Right now, she just wanted to go home, take a long shower, and maybe have a quiet dinner while watching something mindless on television. She started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot. As she drove through the base gates, she thought about the 3 soldiers she had encountered in the locker room. She hoped they would take this experience and grow from it, would become better soldiers and better people. But she was also realistic enough to know that not everyone learned from their mistakes. Some people doubled down on their prejudices, found ways to blame others for their own failures, and never truly changed. Tomorrow would reveal which path those 3 chose. They would show up to her class, or they would not. They would approach their training with respect and humility, or they would carry resentment and anger. Sarah had done what she could to give them a chance at redemption. The rest was up to them. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel more significant. Sarah drove to the training facility earlier than usual, arriving while the sky was still painted in shades of pink and orange. She had slept well, surprisingly, without the nightmares that sometimes accompanied violent confrontations. Maybe it was because the situation yesterday had been so straightforward, so clear-cut. There was no moral ambiguity, no question about who was in the right or wrong. The training grounds were mostly empty at this hour, just a few dedicated soldiers running laps around the perimeter track. Sarah made her way to the hand-to-hand combat training area, a large padded room with mats covering the floor and walls. She began her pre-class preparation, checking the equipment, reviewing her lesson plan for the day, and mentally preparing for what might be an interesting session. At 0700 hours, soldiers began filing into the training room. Sarah recognized most of them from previous classes. They took their positions on the mats, standing in neat rows, waiting for instruction. Sarah stood at the front, clipboard in hand, and began taking attendance. She called out names one by one, and each soldier responded with a crisp, present, or here. She reached the 3 names she had been waiting for. Private Davidson. There was a pause, and then, from the back of the room came a response. Present, ma'am. Private Chun. Present, ma'am. Private Murphy. Present, ma'am. Sarah looked up from her clipboard and spotted the 3 soldiers standing together near the back row. They looked uncomfortable, their postures slightly hunched, their eyes not quite meeting hers. But they were here. That was something. That was actually more than something. It was a choice, and potentially an important one. All right, everyone, Sarah announced, setting down her clipboard. Today we're going to focus on situational awareness and threat assessment. These skills are critical not just in combat situations, but in everyday military life. Understanding your environment, reading body language, identifying potential threats before they become active threats. These abilities can save your life and the lives of your teammates. She began the class with a series of drills designed to sharpen observational skills. Soldiers paired up and practiced identifying aggressive postures versus defensive postures, learning to read intent from subtle physical cues. Sarah walked among them, offering corrections and guidance, demonstrating proper techniques when needed. After about 40 minutes of drills, she called for a break. As the soldiers dispersed to grab water and catch their breath, Sarah noticed Davidson approaching her. Chun and Murphy hung back, watching but not coming closer. Davidson stopped a few feet away and cleared his throat. "Ma'am, may I speak with you for a moment?" "Go ahead," Sarah said, taking a drink from her own water bottle. Davidson's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke, as if he was chewing on words he found difficult to swallow. "I want to apologize for yesterday. What we did was wrong. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and dangerous. I let my pride and my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I put myself and my fellow soldiers in a bad position because of it." Sarah studied him carefully. The words sounded genuine, not rehearsed or forced. There was real contrition in his voice. "I appreciate the apology," she said. "But words are easy. What matters is whether your behavior changes going forward." "It will," Davidson said firmly. "I give you my word on that. I spoke with Chun and Murphy last night after we watched the security footage that Commander Harrison made us review. Seeing ourselves from an outside perspective, seeing how aggressive and stupid we looked, it was eye-opening. We were completely out of line." "What did Commander Harrison say to you three?" Sarah asked. Davidson grimaced. He was not happy. Not happy at all. He gave us a choice. We could face formal charges and probably end our military careers before they really started, or we could accept his alternative punishment. Mandatory counseling sessions twice a week for 3 months, extra duty assignments. And we have to write formal apologies not just to you but to every female service member and contractor on this base. Plus we're on probation for the next year. One more incident, anything at all, and we're gone. "That seems fair," Sarah said neutrally. "More than fair," Davidson corrected. "We should have been court-martialed. The commander said you advocated for leniency. I don't understand why you did that. But I want you to know I'm grateful. We all are." Sarah took another sip of water before responding. "I did it because I believe people deserve a chance to learn from their mistakes if they're willing to genuinely learn. The question is, are you? Are you actually going to examine your attitudes and behaviors and make real changes, or are you just going through the motions to avoid punishment?" Davidson met her eyes directly for the first time. "I'm going to make real changes. I swear it. Yesterday, in that locker room, I became someone I didn't recognize. Someone I don't want to be. My father served 25 years in the Army. He taught me to respect the uniform, respect the service, respect my fellow soldiers regardless of who they are. Yesterday, I dishonored everything he taught me, and I dishonored myself." There was raw emotion in his voice now, and Sarah could see that this young man was genuinely grappling with what he had done. She softened her tone slightly. "Then, use that feeling. Use that awareness. Channel it into becoming a better soldier and a better person. That's how you honor your father's teachings, and make yesterday mean something positive instead of just being a shameful memory." Davidson nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am. I will." He hesitated, then added, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. How did you do it?" "I mean, we've all been through basic combat training. We've studied hand-to-hand techniques. We thought we knew what we were doing. But you dismantled us in seconds. It was like we were children fighting an adult. How do you get to that level?" Sarah considered the question. It was genuine curiosity, not an attempt to make excuses. "Time and experience," she said simply. "I've been training in various combat disciplines since I was 18 years old. That's over 2 decades of consistent, intensive training. I've worked with the best instructors in the world. I've been in real combat situations where the stakes were life and death. All of that adds up to a skill level that can't be matched by a few years of standard military training." "But you're a woman," Davidson said, then immediately winced at his own words. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. What I mean is, I've been taught my whole life that men are naturally stronger and better fighters than women. Yesterday proved that belief was completely wrong, and I'm trying to understand how." Sarah appreciated that he was asking rather than just rejecting what his own experience had shown him. Physical strength matters in combat, but it's not the only factor, and often not the most important one. Technique, timing, experience, mental discipline, these things matter just as much if not more. Yes, on average men have greater upper body strength than women. But I'm not fighting the average. I'm training to fight the best, the most dangerous opponents. And at that level, you learn to use leverage, momentum, precision, and psychology to overcome any physical disadvantages. It's humbling, Davidson admitted. Everything I thought I knew got shattered yesterday. That's not necessarily a bad thing, Sarah said. Sometimes we need our assumptions shattered so we can build new understanding on a more solid foundation. You can either let yesterday break you, or you can let it remake you into something better. That's your choice. Chun and Murphy had worked up the courage to approach during this conversation, and they now stood beside Davidson. Chun spoke up, his voice quiet. We want to apologize too, ma'am. We were wrong, all of us together. We let ourselves get caught up in group thinking, mob mentality. We should have been better than that. Murphy nodded. I keep replaying it in my head, thinking about what could have happened. You could have seriously hurt us. You probably should have, given what we were doing. But you controlled the situation with precision. You used exactly the amount of force necessary, and no more. That's what a true professional does. Sarah looked at the three young men standing before her, seeing in their faces a genuine desire to learn and grow. It reminded her of moments in her own past, times when she had made mistakes and been given grace by instructors and commanding officers who saw potential in her despite her failures. Here's what I want from you three, she said. I want you to take what happened yesterday and turn it into a teaching moment for yourselves and eventually for others. When you see soldiers exhibiting the same kind of prejudiced attitudes you had, call it out. When you see someone being disrespected because of their gender or background, stand up for them. Use your experience to make this military culture better. That's how you truly make amends. All three nodded seriously. We will, Davidson said. You have our word on that. The rest of the training session went smoothly. Sarah noticed that Davidson, Chun, and Murphy participated with a level of focus and respect that surpassed most of the other soldiers in the room. They listened carefully to every instruction, practiced diligently, and asked intelligent questions. When Sarah demonstrated advanced techniques, they watched with the kind of attention that suggested they were seeing her skills in a completely new light. During one particular drill, Sarah paired up with Davidson to demonstrate a defensive technique against a larger, stronger opponent. She had Davidson attack her with controlled aggression, and she showed the class step by step how to use his momentum and strength against him. As she walked through the technique slowly, explaining the mechanics and physics involved, she could see understanding dawning in the eyes of many students, including Davidson himself. The key is not to fight force with force, Sarah explained to the class. When someone bigger and stronger comes at you, trying to match their power is usually a losing strategy. Instead, you redirect their energy, use their aggression as a weapon against them. It's not about being weak or passive. It's about being smart and efficient. She demonstrated several variations of the technique, each one building on the last, showing how the same principles could be applied in different scenarios. The class watched, absorbed, some of them taking notes, others mentally rehearsing the movements. This was what Sarah loved about teaching, these moments when she could see knowledge being transferred, when students began to truly understand not just the how, but the why of combat techniques. 3 months passed, and Sarah watched with quiet satisfaction as Davidson, Chun, and Murphy transformed before her eyes. The change was not instantaneous or dramatic, but it was real and lasting. They became model students, always prepared, always respectful, always willing to help their fellow soldiers. More importantly, they began to speak up when they witnessed the kind of prejudiced attitudes they had once embodied themselves. Sarah was in the instructor break room one afternoon, reviewing reports and sipping coffee, when Commander Harrison walked in. He poured himself a cup and sat down across from her. I wanted to give you an update on our 3 problem soldiers from that locker room incident, he said. Sarah looked up from her paperwork. I've noticed improvements in their behavior and performance. Improvements is an understatement, Harrison replied. Their counselor submitted a report last week. She said they've shown genuine introspection and growth. More than that, I've received multiple reports from other instructors about them standing up against discriminatory behavior from their peers. Last week, Davidson got into a verbal confrontation with another soldier who was making inappropriate comments about a female supply officer. Davidson didn't back down, even though the other soldier outranked him. How did that situation resolve? Sarah asked. The other soldier ended up in my office getting a formal reprimand, while Davidson received a commendation for maintaining professional standards. Harrison smiled slightly. I never thought I'd be commending a soldier who 3 months ago assaulted a civilian contractor. But here we are. You were right about giving them a second chance. Sarah nodded. People surprise you sometimes, if you give them the opportunity. Harrison leaned back in his chair. I've also been looking at the broader picture you and I discussed. Cultural issues in this facility. I've implemented some changes. Mandatory sensitivity and inclusion training for all personnel. Anonymous reporting systems for discrimination and harassment. Regular surveys to assess climate and attitudes. It's going to take time, but I think we're moving in the right direction. That's good to hear, Sarah said sincerely. Culture change is always slow, but it's worth the effort. The commander studied her for a moment. You know, when I first read your file before hiring you, I was impressed by your combat record. But working with you these past few months, I've come to appreciate something else. Your judgment, your ability to assess situations not just tactically, but humanistically. That's a rare combination. Sarah felt slightly uncomfortable with the praise. She had never been good at accepting compliments. I just try to remember that we're all human, even in military contexts. Especially in military contexts. Harrison finished his coffee and stood. Well, keep doing what you're doing. This facility is better for having you here. He paused at the door and added, by the way, I approved a proposal yesterday to expand the combat training program. We're going to need additional instructors. If you know anyone from your SEAL days who might be interested in civilian contractor positions, send them my way. After Harrison left, Sarah returned to her paperwork, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about that phone call from Marcus Rodriguez, the job opportunity he had mentioned. She had been putting off calling him back, uncertain about whether she wanted to leave the relative stability of this teaching position for whatever private contract work he was offering. But maybe she did not need to choose. Maybe she could do both, or at least explore her options. She pulled out her phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring. Sarah Mitchell, the ghost who never calls back. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. Just busy, Sarah said. Tell me about this job opportunity. Marcus's voice became more businesslike. We've got a contract to provide security consultation and training for a multinational corporation expanding operations in high-risk regions. They need people who can assess threats, design security protocols, and train local security forces. It's good money, and it's the kind of work that uses your full skill set, not just the combat stuff. Strategic thinking, cultural awareness, leadership development. Sounds interesting, Sarah admitted. What's the time commitment? Flexible. It could be a few weeks here and there, or it could turn into something more permanent if you like it. I'm building a team of people I trust, people who know their stuff and aren't in it just for the paycheck. You were at the top of my list. Sarah considered the offer. The teaching position was fulfilling, but there was a part of her that missed the variety and challenge of her SEAL days. Not the combat itself necessarily, but the sense of operating at the highest level, of constantly pushing her limits and solving complex problems. Let me think about it. Can I get back to you in a week? Take 2 weeks if you need it, Marcus said. This offer isn't going anywhere. But I think you'd be a great fit, Sarah. And I think you'd enjoy the work. It's different from what you're doing now, but in a good way. After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly for a few minutes, thinking about the direction her life was taking. She had left the Navy SEALs because 15 years of that intense lifestyle had taken its toll, physically and mentally. She needed stability, normalcy, a life where she was not constantly deployed to dangerous places. The teaching position had provided that. But was that enough? Was she ready to settle into a routine, or did she still have more to offer, more challenges to take on? The question remained unanswered as she gathered her things and headed out for her afternoon class. But as she walked through the facility corridors, she found herself thinking about possibilities, about the different paths her life could take from this point forward. It was both exciting and slightly terrifying, this sense of being at a crossroads. That afternoon's class was smaller than usual, just about 15 soldiers working on advanced grappling techniques. Sarah was demonstrating a complex throw when the door to the training room opened and Davidson, Chun, and Murphy entered. They were not scheduled for this class. Their training block was at a different time. Sarah paused her demonstration. "Can I help you three?" Davidson stepped forward, and she noticed that all three of them looked nervous, almost anxious. "Ma'am, we wanted to ask you something. The three of us have been talking, and we've learned a lot from your classes and from everything that happened. We want to continue training with you, learning from you, beyond the standard curriculum. We were wondering if you'd be willing to provide additional instruction, extra sessions, maybe early mornings or evenings. We understand if you're too busy, but we wanted to ask." Sarah was surprised by the request. She looked at the three young men, seeing in their faces genuine eagerness to learn and improve. It was a far cry from the angry, prejudiced soldiers who had confronted her in the locker room months ago. "What kind of additional instruction are you looking for?" Chin spoke up. "Everything you can teach us. Advanced combat techniques, tactical thinking, leadership skills. We know we have a lot to learn, and we figure we should learn from the best." "That's you," Murphy added. "We've also been talking to some of the other soldiers. There are about a dozen others who would be interested in extra training sessions if you're willing to teach them. We could organize it, schedule it around your regular classes, make sure it doesn't interfere with your other responsibilities." Sarah considered the proposal. It would mean additional work, more hours at the facility, less free time for herself. But it also represented an opportunity to have a deeper impact on these soldiers, to pass on knowledge and skills that could serve them throughout their military careers. It was exactly the kind of challenge she had been craving. "All right," she said. "I'll do it. But we're going to do this properly. I'll put together a structured advanced training program, not just random extra sessions. We'll meet 3 times a week, 500 hours, before regular classes start. It's going to be intense, demanding, and if you commit to it, I expect you to show up every single session unless you're literally unable to walk." "Understood." All three of them grinned, their faces lighting up with excitement. "Understood," they said in unison. "Good. We start next Monday. Spread the word to anyone else who's interested, but make sure they understand the commitment level. I don't want people signing up and then dropping out after a few weeks because it's too hard." Sarah paused, then added, "And guys, thank you for asking. It means a lot that you trust me to help develop your skills." Davidson's expression became serious. "Ma'am, you've already developed more than just our skills. You've helped us become better soldiers and better people. This is just us trying to continue that process." After the soldiers left, Sarah finished her regular afternoon class and then sat in the empty training room for a while, processing the day's events. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Commander Harrison. "Heard about your new advanced training program. Well done. If you need any additional resources or support, let me know." Sarah smiled. Word traveled fast in this facility. She typed back a quick thank you and then stood, stretching her muscles. Her body was tired, but her mind was energized. This was what she had been missing, this sense of purpose, of making a real difference in people's lives. As she walked to her truck in the fading evening light, she thought about Marcus's job offer again. Maybe she could do both. Teach the advanced training program here while taking on occasional consulting contracts with Marcus's firm. It would be a full schedule, demanding and challenging, but it would also allow her to use all of her skills and experience in different ways. The teaching position gave her stability and the satisfaction of developing the next generation of soldiers. The consulting work would provide variety and the chance to operate at a strategic level in complex environments. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus back. "I'm interested in the consulting work," she told him. "But I need it to be flexible, project-based, because I've got teaching commitments here that I want to maintain. Can we make that work?" Marcus laughed. "Sarah, I told you the offer was flexible. If you want to do both, we'll make it work. I just need you available for certain key projects. The rest of the time, you do whatever you want. Does that work for you?" "That works perfectly," Sarah said. "Excellent. I'll send you details on our first project. It's 3 weeks in Singapore, starting next month. Corporate security assessment for a tech firm expanding into Southeast Asia." "Sound interesting?" "Very," Sarah confirmed. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her truck and looked out at the training facility. Lights were coming on in various buildings as night fell. She could see soldiers moving between buildings, heading to dinner or evening activities. This place had become important to her over the past few months. These people had become important to her. The work she was doing here mattered. But so did the work Marcus was offering. She had spent 15 years as a Navy SEAL, and those skills and experiences should not go to waste just because she had retired from active duty. There were still ways to serve, still ways to make a positive impact, even outside the formal military structure. Sarah started her truck and pulled out of the parking lot, feeling more settled and optimistic about her future than she had in a long time. The confrontation in the locker room, as unpleasant as it had been at the time, had led to positive changes. Not just for Davidson, Chun, and Murphy, but for the facility's culture and for Sarah herself. It had reminded her that she still had much to offer, that her experience and skills were valuable, and that she could continue to serve in meaningful ways. The road ahead stretched out before her, illuminated by her headlights, full of possibilities. Sarah drove home with a sense of contentment and purpose, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. She had faced down hostile soldiers in a locker room and turned them into dedicated students. She had navigated complex military bureaucracy to achieve a just outcome. She had been offered exciting new professional opportunities. Life was good, better than it had been in quite some time. And the best part was, she had done it all by staying true to herself, by maintaining her principles and values even when it would have been easier to compromise them. She had shown strength without cruelty, discipline without rigidity, and mercy without weakness. That was the kind of person she had always aspired to be, and it was the kind of person she would continue striving to be, whether in a training facility, a boardroom in Singapore, or anywhere else life took her. The story that had begun with aggression and confrontation had transformed into one of growth, redemption, and new beginnings. Not just for the three soldiers who had learned hard but valuable lessons, but for Sarah herself, who had rediscovered her sense of purpose and direction. Sometimes the most difficult moments in life led to the most important transformations, if you had the courage to face them head-on and the wisdom to find the lessons they contained. Sarah smiled to herself as she drove through the night, grateful for the journey that had brought her to this moment, and excited for the adventures that still lay ahead.